Today's guest on the Savage Leader podcast is Jenny Ming. Jenny is an iconic brand builder, experienced board of director, and CEO. She is currently on the board of Levi Strauss, Kaiser Permanente, Poshmark, Affirm, and Kendra Scott. Prior to her current board positions, Jenny co-founded Old Navy and was the CEO of Charlotte Russe. Jenny, thanks for coming on today.
Thank you for having me. It's really a pleasure to spend time with you and your listeners.
So take me back to the early days of Jenny Ming. What kinds of things were you interested in? Was it fashion and apparel always, or did you have other interests?
Definitely have a lot of other interests. I immigrated with my family to San Francisco when I was 9 years old. And in middle school, I fell in love with home economics. Of course, people like now probably say, what is that? It's domestic science, or you could say, but there's a piece of it in there is about fashion. It's really about sewing. So I was always very good about cooking, sewing, child development. So when I went to college, I majored in home economics, and I wanted to be a home ec teacher. My junior year, the California school system decided home ec was just not academic enough. So they decided to cancel it in all our curriculum. So here I am studying to be a home ec teacher. Before I could even graduate, I was out of a job. So I thought, gosh, what can I do? And my boyfriend then, who is now my husband, said, you should be a buyer. You love clothes. I mean, seriously, you have to remember this is I was 20 years old. So I thought, yes, I do love clothes. Yeah. So I took some merchandising class. I took some marketing class. I took some, fashion design class. So when I graduated, I joined Mervyn's as an executive training program as a trainee to be in retail, fashion retail. So that's how I got started. But yes, I think if I could be anything besides, in apparel retail, probably would be something to do with food because I love cooking.
Always good to follow your passion, follow your purpose.
Yes, absolutely. But so many of us at that age don't really know what our passion is. So I was very fortunate. I kind of knew what I loved to do, and I was able to incorporate that as a career.
Yeah, and talk to me about some of the early career challenges. It sounds like it's really exciting because you talk about as a trainee at the very first level, entry level job in fashion and apparel, and then obviously rising to the very top. What were some early challenges for you?
I think the earliest challenge, because you start from the store, which I actually still believe that any contact with your customer, your consumer is a really great place to start because you know who you're serving, who you're trying to serve. So I was in the store, but I have to say the biggest challenge actually was my parents, especially my mom. She just, 4 years of college, here I am. She saw it as a clerk in the store. She said, gosh, I can't believe you went to college and you were just a salesperson. And so I was trying to explain to her that it could lead to a career. So it's really overcoming your parents' expectation was one of my challenges. Second, I would say probably my biggest challenge was people didn't take me seriously. Just being an Asian woman, I was soft-spoken. I was, in fact, I think my store manager said to me, I think I was 3 months into the job, and he said, Jenny, you're not going to make it because you're just too nice. You let everybody walk all over you. And I was like, gosh, this was my first leadership lesson was that I wasn't a good manager or leader. So I did not know what to do because I 3 months into my career, so I want to say that I'm not going to make it. I don't even know what to do. So I brought, I was a department manager for linens or domestics. So I brought everybody together and just say, Mr. Francois said, I'm not going to make it because I'm just too easy for all of you. You guys all walk all over me. So you're probably going to get a new manager. And all of them say, oh, we don't want a new manager. We really like you. So what do we have to do? I said, well, you guys need to stop talking and work. And if you want to, talk to each other, I could schedule breaks. And when you're working, when you're on the floor, you really need to focus on your work and help customers. They say, okay, we don't want a new manager. We really liked you. So what I learned was that being transparent, telling them what they need to do, what is the goal, what they need to accomplish, and having an open dialogue taught me how to be a manager. Because people don't know what your expectation is if you don't give them and set up an expectation. And when something is not working, explain to them why. I know those are very simple things, But those are very fundamental things in being a manager and leader. And I was very fortunate that I learned that very early on, how to manage people.
It's interesting because I think sometimes people make the assumption, especially at the CEO level, that you have to be the loudest person, the strongest, most confident voice, very competitive, very fast moving, very risk taking. But you give such a powerful example of how you could lean into the person that you are as being, not that the loudest voice in the room, but you clearly command respect and create trust and transparency through leading your own way.
Yes. I always say if you went into a big room, a boardroom, people would definitely not pick me as the leader. But you know what? Sometimes that's what surprises people, right? It's not always what you expect. But how do you sometimes don't have to be the loudest voice, but with substance and to the point. And like you say, really, it's so important that leaders comes different shapes and sizes and age. I think that is even more important. It's not just default to, a white male at 50 something that has the loudest voice. It's something that I really believe in. And I very much devote my entire career is really helping develop leaders, especially women leaders of color.
Yeah, I'd love to touch on that in a minute, but just take me back to that transition, because how did you just become comfortable in just being who you were earlier on in your career when the models that you saw that your boss at the time told you that you weren't going to make it because you weren't this other version of leadership that perhaps he expected? How did you just become comfortable with that and build your own leadership brand?
My goal when I graduated from college was to become a buyer. So when I became a buyer, I think it was like 26, 27, I'm like, wow, gosh, I made it. In fact, I called Mr. Francois back years later and to say, you said I wasn't going to make it. I just want to tell you, I became a buyer. And he laughed. He said, you know what, Jenny, you really needed to hear that lesson. So I think he did it purposefully. But of course, at that time, I was very hurt. So sometimes lessons like that really help you through. It helps you kind of come to grips with who you are and what you believe in and what you need to do. And Mr. Francois really did that for me. I think more importantly is when I became a buyer, I thought, gosh, 26, like I said, it's 27, I made it already. So to me, everything else is almost like icing on a cake. So I have nothing to lose, but everything to gain. So I'm never really afraid. And I also, because it's more than I ever expected in my career already. I'm one of those people that love a new challenge. I love learning something new. So I don't sit still. I'm always looking at, gosh, especially when I was a buyer, like we accomplished this, but what is my next year's goals will be? What do I want to build? So I think when you challenge yourself like that, I'm very comfortable in my own skin is because I think it's almost, I kind of like surprising people. Like I said, if you go into a room that I would be the last person you would think to be leading something. But when they find out, actually, I am the leader, I love that, giving people a surprise. So it's because I think the unexpected sometimes give them kind of off guard. Well, especially coming from my business, when I was a buyer, I did a lot of negotiating, right? So I think people don't expect the quiet Asian women to be so steadfast and strong. And so I love being a leader and being a manager, that thinking that you really have nothing to lose but everything to gain, is that you could be your true self.
That's an interesting mindset, especially I think about you as having accomplished so much, and you as an early buyer, it's almost like you had this mindset, you already achieved the top, but you had so much further to go. How did you get that mindset of just nothing to lose, everything to gain when you were still really early in your career?
Maybe being an immigrant, I think it was very much taught to me. My family, came from Macau, and my parents gave up a lot to bring all of us here so that we could have an education and do well in our career and do well in life. So I always feel like I need to do better, or I'm excited to accomplish certain things. I think there's a little bit of that in back of my head. But I also think it's an incredible feeling when you can accomplish something that you never expect to. Like I said, I don't think anybody expect to. Yes, I think they expect it could be a buyer, but I don't think everybody if you met me in high school, you met me in college, they would never think that I could be one of the founding member of a huge brand or be a president or CEO or a board member. But I think that there is that in all of us, but you have to want it. I think you have to have the passion that you want to achieve and learn, but also have the, maybe that's what they call grit, to stay with something and persevere. I think that kind of feeling is something that has always been in me.
You talked about it's in all of us. And how do you, obviously, if you just sounds like a case came naturally being an immigrant, the mindset of nothing to lose is, how can people just bring that out in people, or how have you helped bring that out in other people? It sounds like obviously you're very involved and passionate about mentoring women in leadership, women of color in leadership. How do you bring that out in people?
Well, sometimes, first of all, sometimes people just don't think they have it in them, or they give up very early. And I always try to tell stories about myself. It's just because if you know me later in life, later in my career, you just assume, of course, Jenny was the president, or of course you could be a CEO. But in my early career, you probably would have never think that, So I always tell people, how I started. I wanted to be a home ec teacher, and now I became a buyer because, when something didn't work, then you think about what's next. What else are you excited about to do? And I tell them stories that if I could, seriously, I'm not just saying it. If I could really accomplish what I've accomplished, you can too. Because, I went to a state university. I majored in home economics. So I don't really have a profile, that I went to a prestigious school. I got an MBA, I was trained. No, not at all. So I think sometimes it's not where you went to school, what company you work for, but it's who you are. And then you have to believe in yourself, but you have to also want it. Nobody can make you want something. You have to want it. If you really want it, here are some of the things that you can do. So I think it's really exposing people the possibility of what they can do and want to do. Everybody wants to succeed, but how and why really makes a difference.
And you just gave two really great leadership lessons in vulnerability in terms of sharing your own story. And hey, you weren't always in this position, but also humility. It's just, those are such powerful leadership principles.
I love sharing my stories is because I feel very fortunate to be where I am. And so I want people to know they can too. And that is the reason why, when you asked would I be on your podcast, I was more than happy to. Anytime I could, reach even one person is one more than I ever had, right?
So let's fast forward a little bit in terms of the Old Navy story. Just, I love that obviously it's an iconic brand, and I was there and once it was up and running. But what was that like? How did the brand? What was the genesis of that?
Okay, well, let me start by telling you, we started the brand with 11 people, and I was employee number 1. So Mickey asked me one day. In fact, actually, I think I was telling him that I want to move my family. My husband just got a new job in Hong Kong, and we want to move our family there. And we have a pretty large sourcing office in Hong Kong, and I love sourcing. So I said, I'm sure you're going to find me a job there. And he said, oh, we just decided to start a new brand or a new business. And, we have Gap in the middle, and then we have Banana, but we don't play in the mass value sector. And we thought that you would be terrific. I step back, I'm like, gosh, I get to start a new business. But in the meantime, my husband got a new job. So, but I knew I wanted to do this. So I went home and tried to tell my husband, I said, you know what, I got a new opportunity. And I really love to do this. But he also had opportunities. So people would always ask, when you have two career-minded people, how do you make the decision? The good thing is my husband and I are very aligned. We make our decision based on our entire family, like what is good for the family, not just for one person. So after conversation, he think, no, I think we should. So my whole take is, where do you think our kids would be best growing up where, in Hong Kong or the Bay Area? And it really came down to was the Bay Area. So I got to do my startup, and he decided to not do his opportunity. So the reason I share this is because, so when it was announced I was going to do this, I have to tell you, 90% of people thought I was crazy, that I was taking this huge risk, because the Gap brand is so well known. And I'm doing a startup that is not well known. And she's like, are you sure you want to do this, Jenny? This is like, it's kind of risky. Seriously, it never entered my mind that this was risky. I thought that was an incredible opportunity. So I step back and say, gosh, how come I think it's an opportunity why so many people thought it was a risk? And you know what? That was the difference, right? To me, it was, gosh, if it didn't work out, I would have learned so much. I'm sure the Gap would find me another job inside the corporation. So I didn't think twice about it. So we started with that. And so it's we started in February 1993. And by August of 93, we got product in 250 stores. So we took the bottom 49 store of Gap brand. When we pulled it out, actually, those 49 bottom store lost money. In fact, we lost $200,000. No, we lost $2 million in those 49 stores. And Mickey said to me, if you could break even, I would be very happy. But really, it's important that when you do a startup, to learn as much as you can, because whatever you do, it doesn't affect the company. So do not be afraid to take risks and learn. That was a great lesson I never thought about. So he did give us one store that we could start from scratch with our vision of what that brand could be. You know, when we got product in the store in August, right away, we could see how well it did. In fact, it was a winner from the get-go. By September, October, we knew we had a winner, which, okay, you and I both know many, many startups, and you know very seldom or very, very few times that you could have a winner immediately. Well, Old Navy was that. It was a winner from the very beginning. So we knew by October we were going to roll out, and that we actually at that time was called Gap Warehouse, and we knew we had to find a new name and a new brand, because Gap Warehouse seems like it's part of Gap brand versus a new brand, a new identity. So that's how we got started. The rest, I would say, is history, as you would all know.
Yeah, something you mentioned earlier I think is interesting is you said you didn't take fashion seriously, but you took what you did seriously. Can you talk about that a bit?
Yeah. So when we first started, we say, I think like everything else, we say, what do this brand stands for? What do we want this company to stand for? And I love to say that. So it stands for fashion, value, family, and fun. And the great thing about it is now 25 plus years later, these 4 pillars of brand pillars still stands at Old Navy. So it really stands the test of time. So fashion, of course, we want to be on trend. Value, we want to give we want to give our customer more than they expect. Because, a value is only a value when you give them more, not less. And certainly not the same, right? If something costs $20, but it's really worth $40, this is when you get a great value. And then family, it's all about not only the traditional families. Family could be your friends, it could be your community. We want also the non-traditional family be part of it. So it's a very inclusive brand, which it still is today. But last but not least is fun. Not taking clothing or fashion seriously. I mean, I don't know if you remember when you were at Gap Inc., we took fashion very seriously. And we say, what, fashion should be fun. Shouldn't be so serious. And clothing is important, but certainly not on the top list of everything as a young family you want to do. I mean, you want to spend more money on education, you want to spend money on mortgage, or vacation, or experience. And somewhere down the line, clothing or fashion is important, but not that important. And we truly believe that. So we want to give fashion at a great price that you would be proud to wear, that you're on trend. So that's why we have all these fun clothes. I mean, we were the first came up with cargo pants. When everybody has very clean khaki, we had cargo pants because we have pockets. I always say, let's have fun with fashion and not take fashion seriously. But we take what we do very seriously, is because we really have a purpose and a mission. And we took that very seriously.
And how did the brand evolve over time? I know recently it was named one of the brands that matters. What was that evolution like?
I would say that the first 5 years was unbelievable. It just really, we broke all records. I'm talking about, we hit $1 billion in less than 4 years. We were named the brand of the year. We were on Ad Week. We were everywhere. We won awards for our store design. I mean, it was really incredible. But we all know that everything goes up, also comes down. So we kind of expected it would plateau or even dip. So we were ready for that. So I think like any brand, the most important thing is you have to be relevant. That means you have to matter, right? So in fact, Nancy Green, who's the current CEO, and I worked together at Old Navy. She was head of kids and baby when I was there. She texted me. Of course, I saw that we won that award. Of course, you could still see that I have so much pride in that brand. And she actually texted me to tell me, and I said, actually, Nancy, it's so funny because I was about to tell you congratulations. So, but I think like any brand, you have to evolve with the time. You have to be current. You have to know what your customer or your consumer wants and connect with. So I think all of those things is very important, that it matters.
And especially in retail and especially in fashion. I think we're all at the whims of the marketplace change, but gosh, I mean, just quarter to quarter, month to month, even, that's an incredible pressure just to stay relevant.
Well, you know what I think is, this is something I actually learned from, Don Fisher, the founder of Gap. He always believed that you have to change. You have to keep evolving. In fact, one of his quotes is, if you don't change, you'll die. And I know it might sound a little dramatic, but brands do die if they are not relevant or loved, right? So you got to really understand that. And I think the great thing about being in fashion, it's kind of in your DNA about being changing all the time, because fashion does change all the time. If you stay put, then you're not on trend. So I think it's in our DNA. Always look for it. What is the next? What is the next trend? What could it be? What is the possibilities of your brand? What can it be? So I think it is in our DNA about changes. It's about evolution.
I think that's just as true for us as our careers and our roles as leaders, is to stay relevant, to constantly grow and get better and learn.
Yes, I am a true believer of that. I actually tell people, and I really believe it. I'm not just saying it. I feel like I know less about retail than I did 10, 20 years ago. And people would scratch their head. What do you mean, Jenny? I said, because it's ever changing. So when you think is when sometimes it's moved already. So I consider myself a life learner. First of all, I love the fashion business. So I really love reading about the consumer mindset. Especially, I think the last 2 years during the pandemic, we think very differently. We want very differently. How we connect with brands are differently. What matters to us is differently. So I think during this last 2 years and continuing now, I think there's been a lot of changes. So it's been very interesting for me to read about it or stay on top of it, is because there's been so many changes the last 2 years.
Talk about that a little bit. I think that's really interesting. And what are you doing to advise companies about how to stay relevant, to adjust to the new wants and needs of their consumers?
So, as you know, I would not use the word retire, because it's not a relevant word to me. So I actually am on many boards, and being on different boards, one of my biggest thing is really how to stay engaged and how to be relevant, because I'm no longer a working CEO, right? So if you're no longer, your daily life is connected to consumers, how do you stay connected? So for me, is being on all these boards and also challenges me. And so I listen as much as I contribute. I probably listen more than I contribute, I should say. So I learn from different companies, different brands, and really how I read as much as I can, talk to as many people as I can. And the great thing about the boards I'm on, they're all very, very different, as you said, from healthcare to, of course, apparel retail, fashion retail globally, as Levi's. And, Poshmark is a social commerce or, has a huge community. Affirm is a fintech or, buy now, pay later payment system. And, I'm on Kendra Scott, which is a jewelry brand that, that really focused not only about having, jewelry, but it's also about giving back to your community. So every one of these brands I would say, have a very strong mission and purpose, and is very connected to who they want to serve. And they are so different, but it's connected by very focused on customer, consumer, or patient, or people. When my first board actually was on Kaiser. I was on it for 8 years. I left for about 7. I just rejoined this year. And I came out of fashion. I came out of Old Navy. And then when they called me to see was I interested on the board, I'm like, I know nothing about healthcare. Why would you be interested in me being on your board? And they laughed. They said, we have lots of people that knows, medicine and healthcare and hospitals and all of that. But you know what, Jenny? What you know is about people. All the years in retail, that means you know consumer. And we don't treat our patients like consumer. We need to influence them. We need to educate them so they could make better decisions for themselves. We're here to tell them what they educate them, but in the end, they have to make the decision. I was very fascinated with that. I thought, gosh, it's something that I never can think that I could sit on a board of a healthcare system, right? But sometimes, you have to look beyond what you think you know. Sometimes we kind of pigeonhole ourselves. In fact, I was offered many other retail board, and I picked Kaiser as my first board. It's because I thought I could stretch myself and learn something new. You could tell by now that I'm one of those people that take risks and not afraid to learn something new. Being uncomfortable is when you really learn the most. Believe me, I sat through many, many board meetings that I feel like I was kind of faking it, right? But then I always try to remember why I'm on the board. They don't need me chiming in about, a cure or medicine or health, hospital. But they wanted me to chime in when it's talking about the patient delivery care system or how to connect patients with, the virtual care. They want to think about what the patients are thinking. So this is when I know, I have to be at the table and speak about that. That's how you stay relevant.
That definitely, Kaiser Permanente is the board that really stands out of the other ones. The other ones that can, make sense. There's a lot of synergies between them, but that's remarkable that would be your first one also.
Yes. The first time I went to the board meeting, I think there was 30 plus people around. I think there was 14 board members then. And we all came from very different backgrounds. And so it was pretty scary because it's first of all, I always remember not taking, fashion so seriously. Well, because it's not life and death, but, Kaiser, it is very serious. And, I always say, when we used to have to decide on a button, I'm like, okay, we mull over for an hour. We're not saving lives with this button. But, when you're in a healthcare system, of course, it's life and death. It's very serious. So it's a totally different industry. But, I really learned to appreciate every one of my boards is because you not only, like I say, learn about what they do, the purpose and mission, but the board members, I learned so much from them. The leadership team, I learned so much from them. And being part of something bigger than yourself is so interesting and so engaging. As you could hear my tone and how much I enjoy being very proud to be on their board and their company.
What was that like? What was that transition? Because you talked about lifelong learning, comfort with taking risks, but just thinking about that first board jumping into Kaiser Permanente and just being a board member in general, what was that transition like for you?
I would say it actually was a hard transition because I think all of us, especially myself, I'm used to operating. When you're on board, you're not operating. You don't get to do the doing. It's about influencing. It's about telling your point of view. It's about your experience. You don't get to do. So I would say that was the hardest transition. And then the second hardest transition is really about being in an industry that you actually might not be an expert in. So what you do is then take your relevant experience and apply it to a different industry. And it took me, I would say, a few years to really learn how to do that. So I would say that transition is never easy. Of course, now after 15 plus years, it's much easier. I think but you also have to really be connected to the CEO because sometimes, not all the work is being done in the boardroom. So many of your work is being done outside the boardroom. Sometimes you're mentoring someone or you want to connect, with their team. So, I come from a school that I will always want to contribute as much as I can. and I want to be available. I want to be engaged, because otherwise, why are you there?
I'd love just to get a forward-looking view from you. Obviously, you're right in the centerpiece of just so much from social commerce to fintech, and obviously your background in retail is what do you think the future holds for retail? But I think even more importantly is just how is the nature of the relationship between brands and consumers changing, and how do you think it will change moving forward?
I think that's such an interesting question, right? I came out of retail. It's all about product. It's about marketing. It wasn't at that time, in the beginning, that is consumer driven. Now, actually, it is about the customer, but through technology is probably even more so. And so that actually was the reason why I was excited to join the Poshmark and the Affirm board, because they technology based, right? And how they think, how they look at something, how they problem solve is something very different than a retail brand would solve. But today, with technology, you could solve many different things much more efficiently. First of all, you have a lot more data. We had a lot of data, but we just did not know what to do with the data, if you remember, in retail. But now, using those data, you could even get closer to consumers and really serve them the way they want to be served. So I would say retail, the first thing I learned is really get to know who they are and how they want to connect with you. It's their decision. As many of multiple points of connection you want to engage with them is how I would look at retail today. Again, I came out with vertically integrated. We want to control the brand. The whole thing about controlling, that you pull the string, it really is so much less about that today. It's more that the consumers are in charge. They want to connect with you when they want to connect with you, and how they see the brand and what is of value to them is a lot more important. So I would say digital data, all of that needs to be in your brand. I'm not even saying that's the future. It's here. It's been here. But how it evolves with that is what is going to be happen. And there's so many ways, as you say, it's not just e-commerce, social commerce, and how you pay for it is different, just like Affirm or the buy now, pay later. And how do you connect customers from different brands together is another way. If you have affinity for a certain brand, you might now know enough data that here's another one that you could connect with and you would know, and it would be right for you. I think there's so much information, but how you use those information also matters. I think that brands today has to have a purpose. When you say, it's just not good enough when you say, we're just serving it up, but you have to have a purpose and mission behind why you do the things you do. Not only for the customer, but also for the employee that is in the company. When I used to think the Old Navy brand, you step back, yes, we have great product, but it's more than that, right? It's really about connecting, being inclusive, being in a community or family that you belong to. Is about having great value and be proud of wearing something, giving you confidence. That was what the brand stands for. So you have to dig a little deeper then why you exist and what you want to accomplish with that brand.
And you make a great point, especially in terms of mission and purpose from the employee perspective, is, whatever you want to call this period in time right now, the great reshuffle, the great resignation, that's so important because we do have choices. I mean, especially with the working virtually now as well, people just have access to markets they didn't have previously. So just you really punctuate that need for purpose and mission.
But you know what? I would add one more in here besides employees. It's also your investors, your shareholders. We also look for brands that have purpose and mission. So I think today is really, it just doesn't fly if you don't have that. I think especially after the last 2 years, more brands are doubling down on purpose and mission and doing more because they see more that needs to be done. I mean, think about, all the social issues. Brands are wading in on it, which 10 years ago, you would never see that, right? It's almost important because consumer demand that you stand for something, and they want to know what matters to you, what you care about, because that connection matters to them.
Yeah, I imagine as you're saying these things, people are thinking, oh, that's just for, fashion apparel brands, consumer brands. But what advice would you have for just all leaders of all kinds in terms of what are the implications of that need for greater purpose and mission? And how can you, I wouldn't say retrofit is the right word, but some companies were born with mission and purpose. Obviously, Patagonia is a great example. Old Navy is a great example. Okay, now, of course, I'm picking apparel companies, but there's so many. What would your advice be, or what is your advice that you work with companies on in terms of how to bring mission and purpose if they weren't founded on that principle?
I think it could be a brand. It could be a team. So when I mentor and coach leaders, sometimes they don't own the brand themselves, but of course they belong into a brand or company. But it could be a team that what your team stands for. What is your mission and purpose? So actually, I start from there. I can't even, I start my mentoring session is very much like, what is your team? What are you here to do? What do you want to accomplish? What do you stand for? And I start with that. And what do you value? What's your value of behaviors is another piece of a team or brand is very important. If you have that kind of alignment, this is when you, and you, not only alignment and belief, this is when a team works the best because you know what you want to do and how to go about doing it is because you have the same belief. And we have that at Old Navy. And I think, I chatted with you a little bit about that is we started with 4, I would say co-founder. Of course, I have the merchandising piece, which is running of the business. I have the sourcing, the visual design of the store, the merchandise planning. Then we have a head of marketing, PR, and then we have a head of product and design, and then we have a head of store and finance. So all 4 of us have very, very different skill set. We were very short on people, so we were very aligned what we want to accomplish. And we all know, and we had incredible respect and trust in each other. So we knew what we need to do, and we went and did it. I think the best example, when we opened 18th and 6th, our first flagship store in New York, I had some idea what marketing was doing. I had pretty much, idea, how to, what Kevin Lonigan in the store is, staffing. And I have, of course, I know about product because we are very attached to that. But when it all fell together and kind of, when we opened the store, it looked like one person's vision versus like 4 leaders because we were so aligned and we had trust in each other to do our part. This is when it really, because we had a purpose, we had a mission, and we knew exactly what each of us need to bring to bear. This is when things work. And I saw it firsthand for many, many years. And I'm really proud to be able to see that. So it was another leadership lesson for me, which I talk about, is because I could see why when something is successful and when something is not.
And what a great example of, you mentioned alignment, but of collaboration. But how did you go about, from a practical perspective, of gaining that alignment? Because obviously you've got very, I imagine, strong perspectives, lots of really rich experience that were brought to this situation. But how did you actually go about creating that alignment?
So how you create alignment is, first of all, you need to spend time together and really think through what you're all here to do, right? What do we want to accomplish? What success look like? And I love brainstorming session when you have lots of ideas. It should never be a bad idea, but you can't do all of it. So much of it is for us to work through what to focus on, what to prioritize, how much can we handle that we can really accomplish. Of course, I love to say, here's 20 things. I love to do all of them. We all know we can't do that. But are they all 20 important? No. So I think the first alignment is really about agreeing what you want to accomplish and then how to accomplish that and who does what. All of that, the only way is really taking time to work through that process. There's no such thing as, and I love a good, robust conversation or disagreement. But once you walk out of the room, we're aligned. That means even if I didn't agree with you, I'm going to do it. Is because I had a chance to give my point of view. So I would say that is something that I have seen that works. You need to take time to make that happen.
Yeah, it's not just getting aligned, but it's staying aligned, not unwinding that agreement after the conversation happens or that meeting happens.
So we have, instead of a staff meeting, I always call it a priorities meeting, because sometimes you have, especially in retail, you have to kind of refocus, reprioritize. So you want something that's active. Updating is just telling people, what happened. But we call it priorities meeting is really being active active to do something about it. And meeting often to realign or make changes is so important.
I'd love to go back to something you mentioned early on and talk about a little bit more about the work you're doing to mentor women, especially women of color in leadership.
Yeah, that's actually one of my favorite parts when I was in Old Navy and Charlotte Russe is coaching and mentoring leaders and developing leaders. So I've always done it more ad hoc, because this is part of your job. So I also have always done it, when someone called me and say, Jenny, can you mentor this person? Or can you have a conversation? I always say yes, especially, like I say, if it's a woman, especially as a woman of color. So now I actually work for a company called XCO, Leadership Development. So I'm an executive mentor and coach. So I'm actually have clients, and so happen clients I have is from technology, or from food. And leadership crosses all different boundaries. A good leader have very similar traits. Doesn't matter what field you're in. So much of it is just really probing thinking, helping them to think through and strengthening their leadership skills. So everybody needs different things. But I usually start with, like I said, an assessment of their team, because being a leader is really leading a team of people. So really understand that dynamic helps them think through their leadership lessons. So that is what I'm working on today, as I would say a side job. But it just keeps me engaged. It keeps me interested, what is relevant to today's leader. What are some of the challenges they're going through? So that's what I'm doing too.
That's fantastic. Obviously, one of many side jobs that you that you have, but what a great way to be giving back.
No, I enjoy it immensely.
So you gave us a little bit of a forward look in terms of what's happening now or what's next. But if you were to go back through your own career, like what's the most powerful leadership lesson that you learned in your career?
I think probably the most powerful is that it really is about the people, because you only could be as good as you are is who you surround yourself with. I know this sounds kind of maybe old, but it's really true. When I think back, Old Navy is because we had incredible people. And people used to ask me, even as a head merchant, say, how much time do you spend on people? So especially when we were growing, I would probably spend 70, 80% of my time, because I had to keep hiring. As a leader, I had to stop doing the doing, because I need to make sure the team can do the doing, right? So I would say, so the people part really matters. And building the best team you can is probably the most important job as a leader. It starts with people, it ends with people. That's what I would say. And I saw many firsthand. Your leadership matters is because if you are a really good leader and you're willing to develop and work with your team, people want to work for you. And you get to pick of your best people is because you are a good leader yourself. So I would say that's one of probably the most powerful lesson is about people. And I think second is really about taking risks with your career. As I said, when I took on, Old Navy, people thought I was taking a huge risk, but I never thought so. So I'm one of those people, like, I would regret not doing something versus regret if something failed. I'd rather fail and have done it than not have even the opportunity to do something. So I'm a pretty big risk taker when it comes to my own career. And I always encourage people to do that too. As you can see, I'm not very complacent. I don't sit still. Even where I am at my career, most people would say, oh, require sit nicely. But to me, there's still so much out there and to learn and to contribute. So that's the reason why I don't consider myself retired. I certainly am not running a company today, but I feel as much as fulfilled as I ever been in my entire career. So to me, it's like making sure that you are, if you want to be a lifelong learner, it doesn't have to be in business. It could be if you want to be a chef, you want to learn how to cook, you want to learn how to paint, whatever that your passion is. I think I really am a believer that you should do it. And don't regret not doing something.
I think it's interesting. People talk about risks in business or a startup or risks in life, but I don't think people really think about risks in your career. I mean, what practical advice would you give for people in terms of like how do they even think about that? How do they actually apply that mindset?
Well, first of all, I think so many times people are afraid to take lateral moves. They always want to just get promoted. They only want it is vertical. I'm a huge believer that do not hesitate to take on, it could be even a lesser title, but if you're learning something new that could help you in the future, I would do it. Or do a startup, or how to, be a functional expert and be a general manager. A lot of people want to be a functional expert because they feel really good about what they do and what their expertise, what they contribute, which is terrific. That's great. But if you get an opportunity to be a general manager and morph into multi-functions, I think it's an incredible opportunity. I can't tell you how many people hesitate to do that. I hesitated myself because, I was a merchant for so long. And when I was offered the president of Old Navy, from Mickey Drexler, actually I turned it down for the first time. It's because I thought, gosh, I had the best job. I love merchandising. I love product. Why would I want to be the president? I think partly I was so, comfortable and so good at what I did. I didn't see that, gosh, this would be an incredible move, right? I thought about it, and, he keep interviewing president coming in. And I was, of course, in the, interview list. And I thought, gosh, if someone came in and became president, how would I feel? And I felt I would probably be bummed because I worked so hard for this. And a year later, in fact, he was giving me my annual review. And I said, Mickey, you asked me, was I interested in being president? I thought a lot about it. I am interested. And he started laughing. He said, you know what, Jenny, it took you long enough. I thought you would be in my office much faster, much earlier than this. So, I tell this story is just because I think that how could anybody turn down a president role? But I did. It's because, things were going so well. I didn't want to rock the boat. I love what I did. I thought of all the reasons why I shouldn't versus the reasons why I should. And I finally understood why I should. I mean, it was an incredible opportunity. I could really learn so much about being a general manager and learning all the other functions and connecting all of that. So I was the president of Old Navy for 7 years. I never regretted it a day. So not be afraid and to learn something new and take a risk, even if you fail.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. You talk, obviously, that's a very unique general manager type of job, actually a promotion and being a broadening of your role. But I think that's really important. As I remember early in my career, I looked at my friends who were in finance or were in consulting or whatever it was. They were moving up really quickly. And I was building expertise in such a wide array of areas, but eventually there became enough depth where I could weigh in on so many things, and it allowed me, at least personally, to bring so much more richness to a conversation. So it was, I think, extra value, but also just so much more fulfilling for me, at least.
It is, but that's why not hesitating. I think there are reasons why not. Think about all the reasons why is more important.
Definitely, and taking risks.
And because nobody likes failing. I don't like failing, but you know what? But if it's something that works out, you get so much more from it. But if you don't take the risk, you will, and you're bound to fail somewhere along your career. And once you learn that, it's okay. You can pick yourself up and you got something out of it. And I think you would learn so much more, and you would advance your career so much more if you are comfortable with that.
It gets back to something you mentioned earlier, is just being in a state of discomfort is where growth happens. And obviously you have to acknowledge at some level that failure is possible if you're uncomfortable. If you're uncomfortable, there's a reason why.
Exactly. It's so true, isn't it?
Well, Jenny, I really appreciate your time. So much wisdom on so many different topics, but thanks so much for coming on today.
No, my pleasure. I hope you got and your listener will get something out of this.
Absolutely. Thanks, Jenny. Thanks for listening to today's episode of the Savage Leader Podcast. My hope is you are walking away with tactics that you can apply to become a better leader in your life and in your career. If you're looking for additional insight and tactics, be sure to check out my book titled The Savage Leader, 13 Principles to Become a Better Leader from the Inside Out. Also, be sure to subscribe to the podcast, and I would truly appreciate it if you would leave a review and also rate the podcast. Thanks, and see you all in the next episode.